first of all, thank you very much for coming to speak to us this evening. From what we understand, you were there with Martin Luther King when he was assassinated, and you two undoubtedly had a very close relationship. What do you think he would say now about the progress or lack thereof of the civil rights movement today, especially in the light of, on the one hand, America having its first African-American president, on the other hand, the acquittal of George Zimmerman?
For the extremes. The fact that the people of color can now go to any public facility and not be turned away by race or gender, religion would please him very much. The fact we now have the right to vote would please him very much. Technological advancements for medicine to cure people's ills would please him very much. And yet on his last mission, which we worked on together called the Poor People's Campaign, what does it matter? He says, if you have public accommodations, the right to vote, open housing, and your neighbor is malnourished and sick, there must be a standard beneath which no American or world citizen should fall. Today, the radical streams of too few but too much, the glutton and greed, the glutton and greed up top, and too many poor folk at the bottom would distress him very much. The fact that we are now still addicted to unnecessary wars. Not only did the world say, in the biggest demonstration the world has ever known, before the Iraq War, begging Mr. Bush, Mr. Blair, please don't attack Iraq. You don't have evidence that they have harmed us. That there was this determination to go, and so they decided to break international law and preemptively struck a country. Kill its leaders, its family, and put them on display as an exhibit of what to do when you violate us. We now know that Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. And neither man is humble enough to apologize for having engaged in an act that killed that many people. Over 100,000 Iraqis dead, 10,000 British and Americans dead, maybe 50,000 to 80,000 injured. For that, they're responsible. That would disturb him very much. Too much racism remains, too much war, and too much poverty. While we can sit at the public level of the ball game and share at the skin color level of social relations, racism is not just skin deep, it's bone marrow deep. Who owns land and banks and insurance and business and key information? You do business with people that you know and trust and like. The depth of resistance he would be very much against. He would still make the moral appeal to work diligently to end the scourge of racism and unnecessary poverty and unnecessary wars.
You might be disappointed to hear that 2 weeks ago we had a debate here in the Oxford Union, and the House voted that affirmative action was not necessary. Now, from your speech, it's clear that you believe that affirmative action is necessary, but do you think it is sufficient? And if not, what else could be done apart from that?
Well, I'm not pleased with that decision, but neither am I surprised. This is Britain. Britain never broke from apartheid South Africa. We marched down Trafalgar Square with Oliver Tambo. The whole world said free Mandela. Mrs. Thatcher in Britain said no. The largest compound inside of the South African government entity in Cape Town is the British Embassy there. So there are deep ties to old colonial exploitative regimes. I hope it's in a generation of people like yourselves who know if it's morally wrong, it can't stand for long. I am convinced that all of you are here because you deserve to be here by a certain standard of entry. And part of the standard was either your parents went here, which inspired you, or you in your secondary education learned to move towards what's required to get here. You learn essays and various levels of math, or summertime development. And so in many ways, coming to Oxford for you was the 13th grade. You were programmed to come to Oxford, Cambridge, as the case may be. Others didn't have the same opportunity. The playing field was not even. But they're citizens, and they're people. In time of war, you don't use the same standard to lock them out. So we must fight together and die together. We must also live and learn together. Your strength may be the literacy from passing exams. Your weakness may be not caring. We all have something to offer. We develop various schemes to learn to survive apart. It's not develop a scheme to learn to live together. We know in America affirmative action has worked. For the majority, it's worked for women and people of color. It's not just for blacks. Some call Title 7, you cannot lock out people of color based upon race. There must be some plan of entry into the highway. For women were locked out. Women get the right to vote in America in 1925 with an amendment to the Constitution. Women have the right to serve on juries in 1967. So there may be some plan to get women in. Now, once the law changed, behavior changed, because if there's a basketball team that's given a school for men, there must be one for women by law. If there's a law school, women and men must be 50-50, women and men. If you have a track team, golf team, tennis team, it must be women and men. By changing the institutional infrastructure, now young girls can get basketball scholarships and track and tennis as young men can, because the law changed the behavior flow. And now that comes young girls playing high school basketball or track or tennis or golf, and college, and now professional, because they have been educated to the end that they're now moving toward inclusion as a matter of law. We live in our faith, whatever it may be. We live under the law. The argument was that if girls are given scholarships, we'll take scholarships from boys. The fact is, girls attract one audience and boys attract another. The reality is we cannot keep figuring out ways to lock people out when all of us matter and all of us are necessary.
Yep. Moving on. So the use of religious rhetoric and kind of churches no doubt played a huge role in the civil rights movement. Do you think religion is helping us rid society of racism and bigotry, or do you think sometimes it is holding us back?
If it's of the theology of Pope Francis, it helps us. It touches our conscience. Pope Francis' religion connects us to Jesus of Galilee, not the post-Constantine Jesus of high life religion. Jesus of Galilee, that's the one that was born under Roman occupation, born under a death warrant, born an ethnic minority, born a Jewish child in the lineage of Jewish religious history, had escaped to Egypt as a refugee to keep from being killed by an act of genocide, came back and showed his wisdom off at the temple, went back to the countryside as a poor person and a carpenter, who came back with a new view of the world. He said, now I've seen Herod of my own religious faith become a tyrant. I've seen the oppression of Rome as a tyrannical despot regime. I've seen the Sanhedrin religious leaders exploit the people. I come with a new religion. I have been anointed to preach the gospel, good news to the poor, the majority of people, to heal the brokenhearted, to set the captive free, and heal people because they need help, not because they got money or prestige. To help them because they need help. He preaches about the Jesus of Galilee. That religion has transformative power because you are measured not by your wealth. You're measured by how you treat the least of these. You're measured by a character test, not just a money test. And every now and then people pass that test and must be honored for it. In America a few years ago, there was a beating of a guy named Rodney King. Many of you saw it, no doubt, on television. Rodney King was traveling on the highway and stopped by 4 white patrolmen who beat him nearly to death. And he was groaning and crying out aloud for help on this highway. And a a white guy named George Halliday filmed the beating. George Halliday could have said, "What is that Negro doing in my neighborhood?" He couldn't be right. They caught him to save him from me. He could have said, they got him, I'm not going to get involved because I could be scarred by having to testify. But some parents' lesson, some minister's sermon, convinced Halliday, the white photographer, it was wrong to beat that black guy unmercifully. He filmed it. The reason we know about Rodney King is because George Halliday, the white guy, filmed it. He went beyond color and culture up to character. He took the risk there to be great. And then when those 4 white police were set free and got away because it was on film, everybody saw what happened. That was just rebellion. That was just riot. And the white guy named Reginald Denton was driving through the ghetto, and 4 blacks snatched him out of his truck, began to beat him, trying to release their frustrations because of what happened to Rodney King. 4 young blacks who did not know each other and who did not know them left their homes and ran and took him away from them and took him to a hospital where some black affirmative action doctor, performed surgery, and saved his life. Beyond color, beyond culture's character. And Reginald Denton did not care how his surgeon got in school. He was just glad his surgeon could perform surgery and save his life.
Just a couple of more questions for me. How democratic is the U.S. today, in your opinion, and what do you think is its chief kind of democratic deficiency? And I guess, as an extension to that, do you believe that the role of money in U.S. politics has changed over the last few decades?
Our democracy is being undermined by 2 things. One, a bill called Citizens United, a Supreme Court case, where they list a corporation as an individual. You can spend unlimited amounts of money on a campaign. So last campaign, the 2 presidential candidates had to raise $1 billion each. So 1 person, 1 vote is way behind 1 idea, 1 million. Too much money in the campaigns forces both parties end up being 1 party with 2 names, both competing to the same trough for the money. The result is you can have a J.P. Chase has $14.5 billion in fines, meet with the Department of Justice, and no criminal charge. Jails are full of young students, 15, 18 years old, with crack, cocaine. Because of that wide disparity between those living in a surplus and those who live in a deficit, America now has jails for profits. There was a lawsuit filed yesterday where private jails are suing states for not having enough prisons for them to house. They're demanding of state governments guarantee an occupancy of 90% occupancy, or we'll sue you. Housing people for money. 2 private investment firms, private equity firms, make $1.5 billion a year off of collect telephone calls from folks in jail back home. A growth in prison labor. 1/4 of South Carolina's prisoners are leased to private companies for profit. And they make 60 to 80 cents an hour. Half of it goes to pay for the rent of the jail cell, and half of it for medical purposes and for child support. It's a form of slavery. In Cook County, Chicago tonight, there are some youth who've been in jail up to 5 years waiting for trial called pretrial detention because they cannot pay a $700 bail. For them, jail becomes a homeless shelter. And so the use of so much money determining political priorities is a bad thing. The growth of the jail, Correction Corporation of America is on the stock exchange. Their money rising forward the stock and their product is prisoners. That undermines the moral authority of our government and puts our democracy to shame. I think the other worst thing that's happening to us tonight is the will of so many to be undemocratic. Schemes on voter suppression, where you can't vote on the Sunday before the election because that's a big turnout, or where they cut down early voting periods, or they demand that people show their voter IDs who may not have an ID, but have other forms of identifications to vote. So the resistance to an open, free, fair democracy is in conflict with the principles that we hold dear. You would think American democracy is 200 or 300 years old. It's just 48 years old. Democracy in America began in 1965. Certainly slavery and democracy couldn't coexist. You couldn't call that democracy. Certain democracy and colonialism, segregation couldn't coexist. Democracy began in 1965, and between 65 and 08, we went from the denial of the right to vote to President Obama being in the White House. Because a whole body of people who've been locked out, blacks, Latinos, women, Asians, gays, a whole body of people came into the system and made America better. If one studies the map and goes south today, from Virginia round to Texas, there's a new economic South. You now have these athletic teams there. You couldn't have had those teams behind the cotton curtain. You couldn't have had the Olympics in Atlanta behind the cotton curtain. You couldn't have had CNN in Atlanta behind the cotton curtain. You couldn't have had the Super Bowl games in Florida and Super Bowl games in New Orleans behind the cotton curtain. All the automotive investment, athletic. When the society opened up, the whole South grew. And the irony is people who are benefiting from the New South are still morally jilted. I saw a case last week in Kentucky, which is the opening up of the gateway into the Appalachian Mountains, most of white working class people, but people were fighting against Obamacare. They wanted affordable care. They wanted have insurance on pre-existing conditions. They wanted insurance to protect them between jobs. They wanted youth to stay on their parents' insurance plan until age 20. They wanted affordable care, but not Obamacare. That's like wanting an omelet without the egg. Affordable care is Obamacare. They were poisoned by the name. So if the name, if you make the name Obama poison, he was not born here, he's not an American, he's not one of us, and you put that name on health care, the people, 47 million have no health insurance. They're rejecting their salvation because it's been poisoned. And that's sending him with positive discrimination. But I'm not for discrimination, I'm not either. I'm for access to the road. You should not be locked out because of religion, or sex, or gender, or race. We're all for positive access. We should not be for discrimination. And what's called affirmative action is not discrimination, it is access to people too long locked out. Thank you.